Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm reviewing Season 1 of Netflix and Marvel's Daredevil. Now, a Season 2 hasn't been confirmed, but given that Daredevil is earning some pretty crazy raves online, I think Season 2 is pretty much a given at this point. So I marathoned the show over the weekend. 13 episodes, of course, is a lot, so I'm just not going to have the time to go through and do a breakdown of each episode. I previously mentioned that I was probably going to do a review of the show, and I even flat out said that I can't do it for 13 episodes. It's just like that would take forever. So what I'm going to do is just sort of give kind of a quick overview of what I think about this take on the characters and the story itself, and I'll talk about a few things that I wasn't totally happy with, and mention a few Easter eggs I spotted, and then we'll just kind of wrap things up. So there are going to be spoilers on this, by the way. So if you don't want to hear anything like that, then the short version of this is seriously go watch this. It's really, really good. So with that said, let's kind of get right into things. And first of all, I gotta say, I'm one of those people, and I know I'm not the only one online, that basically by the time I saw the opening credits on the end of the first episode, at the first episode, I was like, okay, I'm sold. This is going to be good. And then, of course, by the end of episode 2, with that fight there, and it was just like, yeah, they're totally getting this right. And of course, they have good people working on this show. This was written by Stephen S. DeKnight, who's one of Joss Whedon's crews, a veteran of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and other stuff. So obviously that Joss Whedon influence is going to be there, but it's still its own beast. It's still very much Daredevil. And this, of course, draws on the Daredevil Born Again story quite a bit from the legendary Frank Miller and John Romita Jr. run. Sort of really the story that took Daredevil and basically made him the character that he is today, or at least took the old time, the Silver Age Daredevil, and really reinterpreted him for the modern world. And that's kind of been the go-to story for what people look at when they try to figure out how to write Daredevil. And of course, you can't talk about Daredevil writers without mentioning Brian Michael Bendis, who wrote the series for years and really did one of the all-time great shakeups with Daredevil. Born Again was a story from the early 1980s, and I really hate to say that Bendis sort of took Daredevil and updated him for the modern era, which I think is unfair to all the other very good writers who have been writing Daredevil since Miller left. Now, not all of those stories have been winners, but I don't really think anybody was out there deliberately trying to do a crap job or trying to half-ass it. Daredevil is much loved over at Marvel, even if he doesn't get quite the amount of attention that Spider-Man does, or the X-Men, or Wolverine and whatever. But Bendis spent a lot of years on the book, and he wrote a lot of good stories. I've read a lot of Daredevil collections of Brian Michael Bendis, and he really did have a great take on Daredevil, and he introduced characters like Echo, for example, who's an enormously important character in modern Daredevil, and is just a really awesome character in her own right. He did some really nice takes on Typhoid Mary, one of Daredevil's rogues galleries, one of the top members of his rogues gallery, and kind of a longtime fan favorite villain of mine over at Marvel. Typhoid Mary is a character I would dearly love to see pop up in Season 2, but we'll talk more about that later on. So Miller and Bendis were really obviously kind of the touchstones, the kind of go-to places for the tone of this series, and it gets it really, really well. There's that Frank Miller grittiness that people have tried to copy and imitate for literally decades. And then there's that Brian Michael Bendis, master of banter thing that is such a trademark of Bendis' style. Now, this doesn't always go over well with people. I mean, you can look at a lot of the way Brian Michael Bendis does things and a lot of Aaron Sorkin stuff and see more than a few similarities. They do have a somewhat similar style in that vein, and I've noticed a few people sort of complaining about this. And when it comes to Foggy Nelson, I'll give him that. Foggy's a great character. You love the guy. He's the sort of guy that if he was a real person, you'd want him to be your friend. But yeah, they do lay it on a little bit thick with him sometimes. And as much as I love Brian Michael Bendis, he's a very good writer. He's one of those writers where you're like, okay, dude, I get it. You're clever and you're witty. Let it go, okay? It's time to end the joke here and get on with it. It's just like, okay, man, you need to stop writing. So yeah, he does have a tendency to be a little too amused by his own wittiness, I think is a good way to put it. Now again, I'm not knocking the guy. Brian Michael Bendis is an amazing writer. He's fantastic. I mean, God help you if you've never read Ultimate Spider-Man. It's so much fun. But anyway, let's just kind of get right back into things. So this is where they kind of draw a lot of this stuff from. And let's just kind of talk about the characters really briefly, because I do have some things to do, namely being that Gotham comes on in like half an hour, and I've already been talking for more than 6 minutes. So anyway, we got this fellow named Charlie Cox playing Matt Murdock. Now, he'd apparently been on that show Boardwalk Empire. Sorry, I've never seen that show. So, honestly, the only people on the show that I can really remember seeing in anything else were Vincent D'Onofrio as Kingpin and Rosario Dawson as Claire Temple. Everybody else is like, okay, well, I'll take that back. I've heard of the lady who played Karen Page, but if she's been in anything that I've seen, I can't remember. But anyway, so Charlie Cox, really, really great as Matt Murdock. I mean, he really does kind of capture Matt's, sort of wise ass style. In a lot of ways, Matt Murdock and Peter Parker are kind of similar guys in that way, that they're really good at being smart asses. It's just, Matt Murdock really tends to let it out more when he's in his civilian form, while Peter lets it more out when he's in costume. At least in the modern interpretations. In the old-timey days, Daredevil was a little bit more inclined to be a bit of a wise ass. But in any case, he really does he just really does a great job of selling you on this guy. Like, this angst, this pain, this anger, this genuine commitment to the law. Like, the one time we really get to see him in court with a proper case, he really sells it. He goes out there and does one of those Matt Murdock speeches about the law that really makes the Matt Murdock side and legal side of Daredevil as a character really interesting. And as I said, happy, sad, angry. I mean, Charlie Cox just delivers it all the time. And I really just can't say enough good things about this guy. He was absolutely an excellent choice to play Matt Murdock. And I also have to give him some points for, this guy's obviously spent some time making sure that he knew how to play a blind guy properly. Now, I had a good friend of mine in college. He wasn't blind, but he had serious vision problems. And he actually went to the Indiana School for the Blind. And, he would sometimes, he and I would be talking about it, and he'd occasionally sort of talk about what, kind of he had to do in order to deal with the fact that he had these vision problems and some of the things that people who were like full on 100% blind had to do. So just by being friends with this guy for years, I've just sort of picked up a few of the little details. And yeah, Charlie Cox, he obviously did his homework on that one. So points to him on that. And, I won't bore you with the details on that. But anyway, so let's talk about Foggy Nelson, since I mentioned him. And again, nothing but points to the guy for playing, who's playing Foggy Nelson. Foggy Nelson in the comics is a guy who I've never really been wild about. He's really a character who's just always sort of been defined as Matt Murdock's friend. The one person who Matt Murdock really cares about more than just about anybody. but he's never been a character to me who's really been able to stand on his own. It's sort of like, if you remember the 90s Hercules show, okay, well imagine Foggy Nelson as Aeolus. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, well, screw you for not being alive and watching TV in the 90s, kid. And yeah, Kevin Sorbo apparently in real life is kind of a douchebag, but man, that Hercules show was fun. Dumb, but fun. Like a lot of 90s television. And modern television. And God almighty 80s television. 80s television, man, these days. Dumb, but fun. Yeah, Knight Rider. Okay, so getting back to things. Again, he doesn't really do sell this, though, that you understand why Matt cares about this guy so much, why he is so happy to have somebody like Foggy in his life, and why he values their friendship so much. And I kind of had a little bit of mixed feelings about the whole idea of them sort of painting that, maybe there was going to be something between Foggy and Karen. Apparently this was a bit of a genuine thing back in the old-timey days in the comics. I don't know. It's kind of like, I don't know, Karen. I mean, Foggy's a cool guy and all, but you can definitely score a guy who did not come out of the Jack Black school. Okay, let's put it that way. I mean, nothing against Jack Black, except that I don't think he's particularly funny. But yeah, whatever. So again, especially once Foggy finds out that Matt is Daredevil, that's where Foggy as a character, I think, really takes off. And when he steps up there and, for example, gets his ex-girlfriend Marcy to kind of help things out. And he gives her that really great speech about, like, hey, you need to really go out there and reclaim a little bit of your soul. And, you have to give Foggy some points for actually flat-out name-checking Captain America. So I don't think Foggy quite stands on his own as a character yet, but he was still pretty solidly written, and he was definitely well acted. And again, I can never remember actors' names, so sorry whoever it is that played Foggy, and you don't need to tell me in the comments. I don't really care. But yeah. Speaking of Karen Page, now this is another one that people have actually been responding really well to. Now, Karen Page, I've never really read very much with her in it in the comics. I basically really only remember like the story that she died in. She's dead in the comics, right? Yeah, I'm positive it was Karen Page. So yeah, and basically she's kind of best known for a long time being sort of the secretary who was in love with Matt Murdock. All very sort of old-timey. I don't want to say Mad Men because I've never actually watched that show, but very much the whole sort of 60s mentality of the secretary. And then Frank Miller in the 80s came along, and he decided to make Karen a drug addict who also did porn, and then sold out Daredevil's secret identity to the Kingpin in exchange for some smack. Needless to say, that particular story has never really sat terribly well with feminists. I can't imagine why. Yeah, it was the 80s, and if you're familiar with Frank Miller's work, the guy's kind of fond of prostitutes. So, porn star, prostitute, drugs, it's Frank Miller. Kind of make of it what you will. Of course, in all fairness, Karen did eventually get her life in order before she was killed off by Bullseye. So, yeah, but no. Anyway, Karen on the show. Here, Karen is actually genuinely really cool. And I can't blame people for responding really well to her as a character. And, of course, she got to shoot that asshole Wesley and kill him. It's like, man, I mean, I hate Kingpin, but this Wesley guy, I hate him almost as much. He is just totally down with like, oh yeah, we're gonna kill you and everybody in your family. I mean, that speech that he gave to Karen just before she killed him, like, when you have no more tears left to cry, that's when we'll come to this, like, you miserable little prick. And of course, Wesley learns the hard way that you don't have what it takes to shoot me is really not a smart thing to do to somebody whom you've just told you're going to murder everyone they love. I was like, yeah, I literally was watching that on my screen. I'm like, wow, Wesley, you dumbass. And I guess that also covers pretty much everything I have to say about Wesley, except though that his genuine loyalty to Fisk was interesting, but never terribly well explained. But anyway, Karen, I really do like that they sort of turn her into somebody who's changed by circumstance from an ordinary person to somebody who is kind of in a lot of ways the embodiment of what it is that Matt keeps talking about how it's important to stand up to fear. I mean, Matt's a friggin' ninja. It's easy for him to stand up to fear, or easier than it would be for most people. Karen Page is a secretary. She's nobody. But here she is going out there and taking on the Kingpin and basically the scariest bastards in all of New York. And yeah, she's scared and she has every damn good reason to be. But she doesn't stop. She doesn't stop. And when push comes to shove, she pushes back. And Wesley learns that the hard way. Don't push Karen Page. So yeah, I mean, this is in a lot of ways different than what we get the Karen Page in the comics. Although, it's alluded to that there's some nastiness in her past, and kind of makes you wonder, like, oh, well, okay, are they going to go and say, like, yeah, she was a drug addict who did porn at one point? I mean, I'm not really sure how I would feel about that, to be perfectly honest. But, that's, well, there's no point in getting angry over stuff that they haven't actually done. Getting angry over speculation is one of the things that fandom loves to do, and that I fucking hate more than just about anything. Also, points to Daredevil for being basically the only second live-action Marvel thing to contain the word fuck. They only got to say it the one time, but hey. Also points to this being the one Marvel, basically this being for actually having the words "suck my dick" in something Marvel. Outside of Punisher Max, the Punisher Max comics, which were of course written by Garth Ennis, I would never have expected to see that. So, yeah. Let's see. Okay, so that kind of covers the good guys, I think. So we definitely do have to talk about Vincent D'Onofrio as Kingpin. Oh, wait. I forgot to talk about Claire Temple, Rosario Dawson. Well, her counterpart in the comics is Night Nurse, and her name, as she implies, is sort of this nurse who discreetly patches up street-level superheroes when they go and get hurt. I'm not really familiar with her. The only time I've ever read anything with her in it was a Doctor Strange miniseries from a while back. Might have been Doctor Strange the Oath. I'm pretty sure it was written by Brian K. Vaughan. And she was kind of a supporting character in that story, or whatever story it is I'm thinking of. And actually ended up with her becoming Doctor Strange's new girlfriend. And there was a bit where we actually saw her, kind of at the place where she does her job, and like Iron Fist was literally hanging out in the waiting room covered in blood. But we'll talk a little bit more about Iron Fist in a minute. So yeah, Rosario Dawson, Claire Temple, really nicely done. I really like that interplay between her and Matt, where she's freaked out, but she's another example, like Karen Page, this good person who has every reason to be scared shitless, but nonetheless stands up to the bad guys. And yes, she does leave. Rumor has it that she's kind of going to be the touchstone between all of these other street level heroes. Somebody they go to get patched up. But again, that's just a rumor, so who knows? But Rosario Dawson is a good actress, so I'm pretty sure Marvel would be more than happy to keep her around if they possibly can. And yeah, I did like how she really did handle that whole thing with Matt really well, and even said, like, look, you know that you're missing out on something great here because you can't let this go. And that's one of the classic prices of being a superhero, is that you have to sacrifice very often the chance at real and meaningful relationships with people who could really be something with you in order to have this other aspect of your life. And I really like how she doesn't buy into Matt's crap, and she really gives as good as she takes. She really is great at calling him out on his bullshit, which really cool. But anyway, getting back to the bad guys here. More than one person has really said that Kingpin is really, in a lot of ways, the best done character in Daredevil. And I don't know if I 100% agree with that, but I totally understand the sentiment. Vincent D'Onofrio is really, really just amazing here. Now, I was previously familiar with him from Law & Order. I never really liked Criminal Intent all that much, but I never had any problems with him as an actor. He's very good. And here he really, really takes everything he's given us with Kingpin and really does a good job with it. I mean, it is just amazing. And in a lot of ways, Daredevil is as much an origin for the Kingpin as it is for Matt Murdock as Daredevil. I mean, some people were complaining like, well, Kingpin doesn't have his cane, he doesn't wear the trademark white suit. And honestly, Kingpin here, as vicious as he is much less vicious than his counterpart in the comics. Like, comic book Kingpin is a nasty, nasty son of a bitch. Like here in the show, he's sort of like him killing his father is sort of a spur of the moment thing he does to save his mother. In the comics, he deliberately killed his dad. He deliberately tortured his father to death. I mean, there was things like put a bag of live rats over his face. I mean, I remember reading this. It was like the Kingpin Origin miniseries. And there was another thing where he was looking to get back at a guy who had, and I kid you not, had raped him while he was in prison. So he gets out and he basically rounded up like literally like a dozen crackheads and photographed them gang raping the guy's wife and then sent him the photos in prison. I mean, I read that and I was like, holy shit. That's messed up. Really, though, in the comics, Kingpin's only real redeeming virtue is that he loves his wife, Vanessa, very much, and he has respect for worthy foes, like the Punisher and Daredevil. He totally wants them dead, but he does have more than a little bit of respect for them. And, he kind of will allow that to extend to a little bit of a point of honor occasionally. But, never make the mistake of thinking that the Kingpin is really anything other than a horrible, horrible scumbag. But here he sort of starts out, it doesn't really seem like he's evil just so much as he's ridiculously misguided and utterly ruthless in his determination to have what he wants. And I really love that speech that Madame Gao gives to him towards kind of the end of things. It's like, you can't be both savior and oppressor. And then, Kingpin spends all this time ranting about how he wants to make the city a better place. Basically, his plan is gentrification. I'm going to tear down all these old buildings and build condos. I'm going to kick all these poor people out of their homes and build apartments and coffee shops and boutiques for hipsters. Exactly how much better is that really going to make New York? I mean, you're basically going to throw poor people out into the streets and jack up property values in the city even more. I mean, seriously, man, that's pretty bullshit. I mean, I've never even been to New York City, but I know housing prices in that town are just off the scale ridiculous. It's like, I don't understand how anybody with like a kind of a basic job can even afford to live within spitting distance of Manhattan. Although apparently parts of Brooklyn and stuff, or the Bronx or whatever, are affordable. Okay, whatever. I don't know. I'm probably never going to live in New York, so I don't worry about it. But yeah, they do spend a lot of time really letting us, once he's introduced, and they do take their time into introducing him. They really want you to make sure that you're on board with Matt Murdock before they introduce you to Wilson Fisk. But from then on his journey is honestly, some at times even more interesting than what's going on with Matt. And then what it all culminates in, him going from on and on about how much he loves the city to just basically, I want to murder New York. Okay, now that sounds like the Kingpin that I know from the comics. The utterly ruthless man who cares about nothing except for his wife. And I don't honestly have a huge amount to say about Vanessa. It's just like, boy, she kind of glossed over the fact that this guy is a murderous crime lord really easily. I mean, yes, he does have a certain awkward charm to him, but it's just like, lady, this people regularly orders people murdered and tortured. Don't you have a problem with this? And this is after you basically kind of made this big speech about like, oh yeah, I hate guys who are friggin' liars. All the Kingpin friggin' does is lie about who he is to everybody who isn't you or Wesley or one of his little henchmen. Yeah, whatever. Whatever, Vanessa. Well, we've already talked about Wesley. Nothing really huge to say about Owlsley. Although Leland Owlsley's comic counterpart in the comics is a crime boss called the Owl. Now, what's interesting here is that several times they mentioned his son. So I'm kind of thinking that they might sort of bring him in as the full-fledged, if you will, Owl if they do a season 2. I mean, it's just kind of, I think they're them planting a seed, having that guy's son come back, looking to pay back Kingpin and maybe sort of stake a claim on the New York underworld. And of course, there's if we're talking about things we might see in season 2, we see the flashback to Matt and Foggy in college, and they talk about the Greek girl that Matt used to have a thing for, and of course, this is Elektra, sort of an enormous character in the Daredevil mythology, and a star of like a really shitty solo movie that nobody really wants to think about from years ago. And where Elektra goes, of course, Bullseye can never be far behind. And Bullseye, after the Kingpin, is basically Daredevil's archenemy. Played wonderfully by Colin Farrell in that in the Ben Affleck Daredevil movie. I've always kind of been of the opinion that the Ben Affleck Daredevil movie really, it genuinely has its moments, and I think a lot of people unfairly give that movie shit. Yeah, it had definitely had some downsides to it, but but anyway. Now what's really interesting to me is that stuff with Madame Gao. I'm like watching this whole thing. It's like, dude, Fisk, why don't you just snap this old bird's neck? And of course, then we see her knock Daredevil across the room, and it's obvious like, oh, there's more to this old Chinese lady than just being a really ruthless old Chinese lady. And you have to imagine that Fisk has probably picked up on this. Like, he knows there's more to this lady than meets the eye. And now that he knows that he and the rest of the world know that there are things like people with superhuman powers roaming around. Well, if he knows that there's more to this old lady than what it seems, it makes sense that he'd be so cautious around her. And Madame Gao kind of makes this mention, says this when she's leaving, like, Owlsley says, like, what, are you going back to China? And she goes, no, I'm going back to my home country, which is considerably further. Now, there's a really interesting thing, is that when you see that little packets of heroin that she's selling, they only mention it once, but it's apparently called, the street name of this particular brand of drug is Steel Serpent. And it has this sort of like red snake on the little packages. Now, it's interesting, and this is going back to the whole Iron Fist thing, is that there's this character called Steel Serpent from the Iron Fist comics. And he has tattooed on his chest that snake symbol that's on those packets of heroin. Now, his is black. The thing on his chest is black, and these are red. But it's the exact same thing. And Madame Gao mentions, like, she's going back to her homeland. Well, this, and, the whole crazy super martial arts, well, this all makes it seem like it might be Kunlun, which is basically the mystical city, the Kung Fu Shangri-La, where Danny Rand, aka Iron Fist, learned to become Iron Fist. Now, there's a lot more to it, and especially if you're familiar with the story Steel Serpent is from the Matt Fraction Iron Fist comics, which incidentally are really, really good. Seriously, go read those if you've never read them. They're awesome. But yeah, what were they called? Like the living weapons or whatever? Okay, whatever. So yeah, I have the feeling that this is sort of one of the ways that they're going to be seeding Iron Fist. And if when they ultimately take Iron Fist, Daredevil, Jessica Jones, and Luke Cage and form the Defenders, then the idea of maybe some sort of threat from Kunlun sort of being the big bad, that's out there. We also have that dude Nobu, who, if you see him running around in that red ninja costume, well, if you're a Marvel fan, you immediately recognize that's a ninja organization called the Hand, who are, a major, basically Daredevil's personal Hydra. And they're just basically an evil ninja clan who, if you actually read the comics carefully, you realize are actually also Satan worshippers. Yeah. Demon worshipping ninjas who have a fondness for using their evil ninja magic to bring people back from the dead. And note, they even do say in the series that Nobu's people are preparing his body with their rituals, which basically means they're probably thinking about maybe bringing Nobu back from the dead at some point. Although I don't think they'd pull that out until after Benedict Cumberbatch's Doctor Strange has officially introduced magic into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Let me see. What else? Yeah, who knows? I guess I should throw out the idea there that it also crossed my mind that Madame Gao might also be an Inhuman. And if you're familiar with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. this season, you understand that the Inhumans have more than a few connections in China. Okay, but it's almost time for me to go and watch Gotham, so I'm going to call it here, guys. All in all, Marvel's take on with Netflix on Daredevil is superb. It's got its flaws here and there. The pacing could be a little bit better. And, the dialogue sometimes kind of veers into, okay, you guys, you're clever, I get it, just move on. But despite some minor flaws, this is really, unquestionably, the best ever take on Daredevil. It is an amazing piece of work that is a fantastic addition to this cinematic universe that Marvel has been building for years. And this bodes insanely well for what else they're going to be bringing out with Netflix. And I hope this deal with Netflix continues, because by all that's holy, I want something along these lines done with the Punisher, because I friggin' love the Punisher. The Punisher is the shit, man. Okay, guys, I'm going to call it here then. So, as always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Who's Your Jedi. Until next time, take care and have a good one.